Hello, everyone. We're excited to have you here to join us in the fourth annual Social Equity and Community Social Justice Forum out of the Office of Social Equity and Community at the University of Pennsylvania. On behalf of Vice President Charles Howard, who also serves as the university chaplain, we're delighted that we have an amazing panel of very thoughtful and engaging members of social justice circles across the country to be in conversation with us today about wellness for those who've committed themselves in a particular kind of way to social justice work. You will hear from them over the next 55 minutes or so, coming each from their own experiences. And we hope that this conversation will be enlightening to all of you. I'm delighted that the co-moderator with me is Reneem, who is one of the newest members of the University Life Division here at the University of Pennsylvania. She will kick us off with the first couple of questions, but I also want to say to you that even though there are detailed biographical sketches below of each of our panelists, I want to say just a few words about each before we begin with the first questions from Renee. We're delighted to have Ms. Olita Garrett Fitzgerald, who's the Southern Regional Director of the Children's Defense Fund, where she has served for many decades, who also has background experience working in the Clinton administration and a number of other engagements across her long career to advance the life opportunities, especially for poor children and their families. Olita, we're delighted to have you.
Thank you, Reverend Will.
Absolutely. Talon Bazil Duchesneau, we are so happy to have you back at your university, though through Zoom, where you are a 2015 graduate, where you made this university better by your service, your commitment, and your creativity. And now, as a rap artist, a producer, a sound designer, you are making new opportunities and new platforms, especially for many of our young Native American students across this great country. We thank you for your heart, for your passion that just match up with your incredible intelligence to make us more hopeful about this world and the opportunities that can be created. Welcome home, Talon. We're delighted to have you. Dr. Batsi, you have been at the center of every crisis on this campus that's large scale, things that happen globally, nationally, and locally that have impacted our students in particular, but also faculty and staff. And as a therapist, with your background in psychology, your leadership, wellness at Penn, you are one of those anchor persons at the university, and we look to you for your leadership, especially when we as groups and individuals find ourselves in pain and unclear about just how to sort things out. We're so grateful for your professional expertise, but especially for your heart. Thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you.
My pleasure. And so with that, I will turn now to my co-moderator, Renee.
Thank you, Reverend Gibson, and thank you all so much for being here today. I'm very, very grateful to be in conversation with you all. I'd love to start first by just hearing all of your stories and posing this question to you. As people committed to social justice, how do you set your heart and mind in approaching the project of freedom? And by freedom, as described by Reverend Gibson, meaning flourishing for all peoples and the earth. How did you come to this resolve in your life? What's your story in this orientation, and why did you sign up for this commitment? Talon, if you would like to start us off, that'd be amazing.
Technical difficulties. Hold on 1 second, Talon. We're having trouble hearing you. How about we shoot it to Olita for now?
How about,
Miss Olita? Oh, yes, you're great. Thank you.
sorry, I had the total wrong mic changed. Okay. Um, so for me, I have the privilege of, even though I had kind of a rocky childhood at times, I had a father there. And my dad, a lot of this made me think of him because I learned from both his triumphs and hard times in terms of he was someone who came from a hard life and went to college when I was born and went off to get a PhD in clinical psychology. When he returned back to the reservation, he worked so hard and did so much that I think it burnt him out, and that contributed to a lot of the things we faced in my family, that some of it still affects us and me to this day. But when I was about to go into Penn, he knew that I wanted to study psychology, which is what I majored in. And he said, you know, if you really want to do this and do this work, like if you're really serious about it, you really have to think to yourself, you know, if you're going to help the people here, which was the reservation, um, you know, you have to sometimes be okay with not even accepting a thank you if you're going to help here, because here you aren't going to make a lot of money the way that the healthcare system is set up, the way that things are set up. People, he said, people laugh at me every day because sometimes I'll walk into the grocery store and I have on like these rugged, you know, resi sweats that are ripped up and these things, but I have a PhD. He said, but if I was making $500 an hour doing this, I wouldn't be able to help people here and be present and be accessible and be a normal person to them. So if you're serious about doing this here, what you're talking about, he's like, I just want you to be aware of that. And going into Penn with that mindset state, I started, you know, seeing all of the, you know, role models that I still have to this day, people like Will, people like Valerie DeCruz, people like so many, Brother Rob, like I could keep naming them, Luz. They, seeing them in the way that they kind of honor that same principle, I thought to myself, well, how can I function that in what I'm studying and what I'm doing and also what I love? And I think I've, even to this day, I still am looking for that balance and how to even balance self-care with that and not fall into some of the things that my dad fell into and burn myself out as well, but still try to do something. That's kind of how I enter into all of this in everything that I do, because I'm also Lakota and Dakota, and that translates to ally. So in our life, we're trying to find ways to be relatives to each other, whether it's our own or people outside of our tribe. You know, it's part of that principle as well. So I try to couple all of those things together.
Thank you so much for sharing your story and how your father has influenced the way that you navigate your work. It's really great to hear, and I'd love to hear more from Olita if you would be able to join us.
Yes. Well, very much like Talon, I go back to family roots for this work. I grew up in a very rural community that's about 45 miles from the capital city in Mississippi, Jackson, in a little community called Farm Haven. And it was a village more than a town. But we were all connected either through school or church, or the fact that we were all in a farming community and all of the things that come with that, like the kinds of community gatherings that you have around agriculture. So I've steeped in steeped in a basis of understanding that we were all responsible for each other. And my father was the NAACP president in Madison County when Medgar Evers was the state president of the NAACP in Mississippi. My mother was a school teacher who was teaching school at the same time she was finishing her degree in early education. So we were always connected. We grew up in an area that the community put a lot of emphasis on education, but the state didn't. We were in separate and unequal school districts. Our community actually helped to build our school. We had these events where they were fundraisers, but they were also times when people came on the school campuses, children and adults alike, men and women, to do the upkeep on the grounds. So I grew up in this environment, recognizing that we weren't special, but we had some things more than others. But that we were charged, not only from my parents' level, but from my grandfather, who was a minister. We were charged with your life's worth is based upon how much you can help others and your responsibility to others. So I grew up in an era of, when people were scared of Head Start, and Daddy was bringing Head Start to our community. That when subsidized housing first became available, our family was involved in bringing housing and helping people attain housing so that they could move out of the backwoods and have decent housing. So I was one of 8 children, and I think I got the bug probably more than anybody, though we all recognize that our usefulness on earth is greater than what we can attain individually. So that's where I think it's in my DNA, I say. I was born with this. I was reared with this. I was also reared to understand the value and the way of earth, that, so much of what we depended on came from the earth, and how we had to take care of that. And so all of these things, now how I soothed my own soul in this work, and have managed to stay in this work for now close to 50 years, is that I understand that this is a marathon, that this is a profession, that if we could fix things and they stayed fixed, we could work ourselves, and we would hope to be able to work ourselves out of having to do this kind of work. But we have learned, and I have learned, that as long as there is man and there is free will, that we will deal with some kind of challenge, and that we always have to fight and be prepared to hold things as best we can, and to ensure that the generations are able to live lives worthy of dignity and self-determination. So when I get splintered, like I did on November 5th, even though I fully expected that as a possibility, I withdraw. I think of, I'm very spiritual, and I think of going into the wilderness. I have to pull myself away from people and go and get in commune with the, the greater good, the good sides, the good spirits, and so that I can come back out and continue this work.
Thank you, Alita. And I love that between both you and Talon's stories, the underlying theme has been to taking care towards others, and really just a huge driver in the work that's being done. Batsy, would you be able to share your story as well?
Yeah, thank you so much. So I apologize, my voice is a little raspy. I have a cold, but hopefully we're gonna make it through the discussion okay. So it's funny listening to Talon and Miss Alita's stories because I already see some overlap there as well. So I would start with I'm originally from Zimbabwe, and my first name Batsirai comes from the verb kubatsira, which means to help. So my father named me, but he passed away when I was about 16 or so. So I actually never got a chance to ask him why he had chosen that name for me. But I think just the way that both my parents lived their lives, they're very much raised us with the same values that I think Miss Alita was talking about. This idea that we're responsible for each other, and that whether it was family or anyone outside of our family, that you can't have a sense of peace if other people around you are struggling, whatever that means. So if they don't have food, if they don't have clothes, if they're just not in good health, that you have a responsibility to really think about how to support the people around you. So I would say that that's where it started. And then for pretty much most of my childhood, Zimbabwe's been under a dictatorship. So I think really getting to see from a systemic place what happens when there is gross inequity, forms of oppression. And again, just really seeing how that doesn't just impact, one community, it really impacts all of us in very different ways. So really having that as well as a framework. And when I came to the US for undergraduate school, I went to a historically Black college. When I applied to it, I didn't know that it was a historically Black college. So getting there and learning a lot of the history was very impactful for me as a Black person, because back home we were not taught a lot of the sort of American history, maybe learning more about like World War I, World War II, but not some of the history and nuances of minoritized populations and some of the impact that, again, another system has had on minoritized folks. So learning some of that through my undergraduate life. And then going for my graduate degree and deciding to become a counseling psychologist, which is, I still feel one of the best decisions of my life. I feel like it not only just changed my career trajectory, but also just who I am as a person. And I think it really helped to reinforce a lot of the values. So for my dissertation, I did the work on social justice counseling. And basically at the root of that is, for so long, psychology could have the framework of just focusing on the individual, right? It's very private, it's one-on-one, people don't know what's going on, it's hidden. And really learning that that work is so important and it's work that I love. But it's also insufficient if we're not thinking about the society that the person is existing in. So in some ways, it's almost like, are we helping an individual cope to go back out into a sick society? So we need to also think about the society as opposed to pathologizing the individual. And I feel like that was such a big part of my graduate work. And I continue to see it even in the individual work that I do. And as Reverend Gibson so politely and kindly shared, really getting to see that on our campus when we're called on to do events. Yes, it's affecting the individual, but you really see what the ripple effects are for the whole community, even for folks who don't have a direct stake in what's going on or are not directly impacted. You still see just the ripple effects of what happens when, as a society, we have illnesses as a society, and whether it's racism or any of the other isms, and we see what the impact is on everybody. So again, just really thinking that as a psychologist, it's not enough to just focus on that. It's about the suffering in a very broad sense, whether that's financially, in terms of people having access to safe housing, healthcare, all of those things, education, all of it matters to our well-being. So it's not enough to just focus on the individual. It's really about all of us as a society.
Thank you for sharing. And something that Ms. Olita mentioned earlier was about how to withstand the time in social justice work. And that leads us to our next question of wise folks say this life orientation towards social justice is a marathon, not a race. What do you all make of that? Ms. Olita, if you would be able to kick us off there, that'd be.
Well, you look at history, and as we were commiserating recently over the way things turned out, and people were in various states of disappointment and grief, I had to go back and remind people that there was, excuse me, that there was Harriet, that there was Sojourner, that there was Frederick Douglass, that there was Fannie Lou Hamer, that there was Martin Luther King, that there was John Lewis, there was Marion Wright Edelman, that this work, social justice work, there was Jesus. My goodness. There, this focus on social justice, unfortunately, is maybe not a race that we win. It is a race that we have to be perpetually prepared to fight. If, as I said earlier, if we could count on men, and I mean that generally, to do the right thing toward humanity and his fellow man, then we could look at this as a race to a finish line. But in my estimation, there is no finish line. What we have to do is to continually rebuild the pipeline for this long race toward justice, and that people are able to understand that injustice is not the state of affairs that it has to be. That we are learning here in our current work that civic engagement, civic education, and engaging our communities around social justice in a different way, and not just, we've fallen into this frame where everything is about an election. And that is so short-term and so short-sighted. People, we feel, need to understand what impacts their lives and why things impact their lives. Why the fact that, access to healthcare is a social justice tenet. Everybody should have access to healthcare to make their lives easier to live and to live as long as they are given. Access to healthcare happens in different ways, in different places, different states, different countries. These decisions are being made by men and women. This is not something that's written in stone. It's not like the 10th Commandments. So having people understand why their lives are like they are and how they could be better versus vote for this person or another person. Because once you understand that and you understand these systems, you will be able to understand why you need to vote and who you need to vote for. So that's why I say it's a marathon. We spend a lot of effort and we're investing resources into building a next generation of young Black women. CDF spends a lot of its resources in freedom schools and the Black Student Leadership Network and other ways to make sure that we have a base of young people coming along that will be able to pick up this torch that has been passed down, as I said, from, if we're looking at social justice from the beginning of time.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing those perspectives. Patsy, would you be able to chime in here too?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with what Miss Alita shared. I think a couple of things that came to mind were that as human beings, I think sometimes we can orient ourselves to wanting to protect ourselves, whether there is real danger or perceived danger. And I think that can get really, really complicated when you're perceiving someone else in the community as being a danger to you, and the things that you can then justify as reasons why you need to protect yourself. And I think that's one of the struggles that we have. And I think part of why it is very much a marathon and not a sprint, because it's almost like, our defenses sort of come up naturally, where we're so quick to want to protect ourselves and can have a scarcity mindset around the resources that we have. And yet part of what we're really called to do is, if we had an abundance mindset of there's enough for all of us, I don't have to take from someone else, I don't have to push someone else out of the way. It really is about how do we build a community where we are looking out for each other. And as Ms. Alita shared earlier, we are all responsible for each other. But I think that doesn't always come naturally to us. So I think that's part of what requires so much work. It's almost like needing to recommit each time. Or when we talk about diversity work, the idea of unlearning, we need to almost keep unlearning some of our impulses to again, just protect ourselves and recognize that we don't always need to do that. And even if when we do need to do that, there's ways that we can protect ourselves without causing harm to someone else. And I think that's a big part of why it ends up just taking time. The last thing I'll share is, as a psychologist, one of the things I love about therapy, but can also be very complicated, is change takes time. Sometimes even when we know the right thing to do, it's hard. It's hard sometimes to get out of our own way and just make a decision to change. So I also think that's part of what contributes to this really feeling like a marathon, is like we can know the right answer and yet it takes us a while to get there. So yeah, that's all I'll share.
Thank you for those helpful reminders too. I think we all need to be reminded of that as we move forward. And Talon, would you be able to hop in here and take us home?
Yeah, well, I definitely agree with everything that's been said, and it had all of my gears going, because I think for me, similarly, going into our 10 years post-diploma, I feel like I'm still processing some of the things in that I was even behaving or experiencing at Penn or just encountering. And one of those things I think is, which was mentioned a bit before, is, I came from that scarcity mindset. And, I think as oppressed peoples in general, we walk into places like Penn with, the weights of our communities on our backs, and in everything we do. Even now, as I think about, my job and what I do there, and, any conflicts or stuff like that, it worries me, because I'm like, if I leave there, I'm not a resource there anymore. If I don't do A, B, and C, what's going to happen? Or, doom and gloom immediately fires into my mind, because being from scarcity, it was always like that. It was, the idea of paying rent, or even when I applied for, programs like College Horizons when I was in high school, I was like writing about not being able to afford the postage, because, mindset was more so on food and things like that. But what I had to remind myself, even today, is, the term decolonize gets thrown around a lot now, almost like a trend. But I genuinely considered like things that are colonized. And one of them, I think, is that idea that we do have to, race and be like, even in competition with each other, and how we, dismantle the system and everything. There's this almost concept of like, I remember at Penn, like we would brag about how much sleep we didn't get. And that's unhealthy. Like, it's funny in the moment and even looking back on it, but looking back, I'm like, man, that's really unhealthy. And I think I end up having to remind myself of, just how important it is to take care of myself if I am to take care of other people. Um, I do this work because I have a soft heart, and I worry and I think about stuff at home, and the vulnerable people from where I'm from and things like that. But then, I revert back to the mentors I had at Penn, and particularly the GIC, the Intercultural Center, because they taught me that sometimes by overdoing it, I could be worrying the people that are here for me too in this fight. And that like there's a balance of doing the thing that I know I have to sacrifice for, even though it's going to worry them, versus also doing the thing that I know I shouldn't be doing, and I'm worrying the people around me. And now the vibe's different, and my heart's not all the way where it should be. Because when you walk into spaces like Azalajota, when you sing a song that's for prayer, or you say a prayer in general, or someone asks you to go to a thing, they do say, your mindset and how you walk in does kind of matter. Like that intention goes into a thing, or how you're cooking something, you're feeding people with that energy. Um, and, and, and especially when you're working with communities. So as much as it pains me sometimes, or I'll drown in self-guilt, um, I do remind myself that it is a marathon, because the idea that it's a sprint means that I'm ending early. And where I come from, a lot of people end early. And so for me, I have to stay with the faith that I'm going to be here for a long time. So I don't need to, record 7 albums in a day, because who knows what's going to happen tomorrow. As much as I live as though, anything could happen, La Jota phrase, whatever, it's not in the sense of like, so I have to do it all now because, these things are going to get me. It's no, I'm going to be here for a while. So I need to make sure I make the right decisions to ensure that, and ensure that like I can also pass down these healthy habits and right mind states to, if not my own kids, then, my nieces or my nephews, or the community of youth that I have around me or that I serve. Because what I've learned too in this work is that they more so are looking at what you do as opposed to what you say. So I have to, be disciplined with myself to not be so disciplined, if that makes sense. And again, I appreciated the Intercultural Center for that, because I started realizing that my senior year, and I would try to, calm my friends down who are, again, life or death, emotions, and hurting your heart over things that are temporary, and you are going to do it, and you are going to succeed and help this, and it'll be better. So, relax, or, do the thing that you want to do. Going into Penn, I walked in completely quitting music and going to the radio station. And then over time, realizing that, the music part was actually helping me. So then I started working it into maintaining that marathon too.
Thank you. Knowing how to move at your own pace is extremely important. And with that, I'm going to pass things over to Reverend Gibson.
Thank you, Raneem, for getting us started. The conversation has been so rich so far. I'm thinking about what each of the panelists have said already in response to your two questions. I'm thinking about Talon. This is not an exact quote, but the idea, your conversation with your father about making everyone a relative, that is powerful. I never heard that kind of framing before. For Dr. Botsy to make reference to the fact that the ripple effects of social justice throughout a community, and from our position as a human being, but also a professional, actually see that incredible framing. And Sister Alita, your thoughts about going to a quiet place for yourself after disappointment. And it made me think of another daughter of Mississippi, Mrs. Amer. You referred to Mrs. Amer, and her famous phrase we know is, We're sick and tired of being sick and tired. That Mrs. Hamer came to a revelation of the fullness of her rights because of the work of Students Nonviolent Coordinating Committee down in rural Mississippi where she lived, and she became a voice for democracy for the whole country. I often refer to her as my exemplar of democracy for this country. So with that in mind, I want to share just a little story. Some years ago, I and some other people were sitting around talking to a stalwart in the civil rights movement, and she's now in her 80s. And somebody asked her, how is it that you have persevered in this work over all these years, starting with your undergraduate activism in the 60s to where you are now in your 70s, and you're still doing this work of social justice making, while others in your same age cohort have fallen away from the work. Some have fallen ill, some have passed away, but others have been so disappointed that they've actually just withdrawn. And the way she responded with grace to those people fallen away, so there was no judgment, she said the way she was able to persevere was, number one, she was grounded. Number two, the network of family and friends. Number three was this sense of her own spiritual life, that there is something larger than her in the universe that supports and encourages her in the work. And then again, Olita, your reference to history, she said a long view of history. How does that speak to each of you about this question of social justice, especially across generations, generation after generation? So, Talon, I'd like for you to respond with your thoughts first, would you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as I, in particular, when I went to Penn, because that was such a transformative period for me, where I was starting to question, those mindsets and where I come from, who I come from, what I am, who I am. I searched so hard for people in the movement that were like me, and not so much just the black and white photos of old chiefs and those stories, because they're important too, and they'll tell you a lot from what you can find. But I started looking up people like Buddy Redbow, and he's a character who he a very acclaimed guitarist, singer, songwriter. He was there during the American Indian movement and was there with them at Wounded Knee in the 60s and 70s, and for a lot of the American Indian movement like actions. As he got more acclaim in the music, he would bring artists like John Denver to the res and have them perform on powwow grounds. And there's one video you can find on YouTube where he does it at Chief Fool's Crow's birthday powwow. And Fool's Crow was a very like knowledgeable, instrumental prayer medicine man in Oglala Res and Pine Ridge Reservation. Without him, a lot of our teachings that we have today don't make it through. And because he was there also through the American Indian movement. If you read the book about Black Elk and those teachings that get passed down, that was his relative. So there's like a connection there to sacred knowledge and ways in which we should still live today as Lakota. And in those times when it's so hard to go to Denver or Minneapolis or somewhere metropolitan as a rural Lakota person who's also an activist trying to make it in the music industry, Buddy Redbow put his efforts in creating the first vinyl record album pressing that he could make of not himself, but of Frank Fool's Crow. And that was the first album that he shopped around. He had singles on cassette and stuff because those are easier to print. But his first vinyl pressing and album was Fulscrow. On one side, it's Fulscrow talking completely in Lakota about those teachings with sound accompaniment. And then the reverse side is his personal translator, I believe so, in English, telling these things with the intention that us, the descendants, would hear these, for years to come. And learning about things like that for me really strike home this idea of incorporating being Lakota, being who I am as a relative. We say Madakiase to all of our relations, meaning, because my grandpa would say, do you know what that means really though? It means, this mosquito there and the fly that is annoying you, everything is equal. And you have a responsibility to all of it and what you do and what you say and what you bring to the world. So when you say it, mean that. And that means, as I'm walking in Penn, as I'm graduating and stepping out and going off into the world, I'm still trying to find ways to live that way, even though there are things in the system that are constricting me, like having to figure out living situation and all of this stuff. But I stick close to that prayer and that belief. As much as I am a rap artist and a contemporary artist, you'll find a lot of traditional samples and philosophy in my work. And it also comes from people like Oscar Howe. On my mom's side, she's a Howe. And Oscar Howe was someone who he created his own style of art and showed the world that there was something beyond the native stereotype in which they're seeing in a lot of the Southwestern kind of like realism that was happening at the time. His was more objective, and not even his own people really understood it. And that was the other part, was as a Lakota Dakota in what you do, your own mom or dad might not understand what you're doing or what you're trying to do. But he went forward and he did that. And when you listen to his recordings, it's the same thing. He has one of one pieces that he just gives to people because they were in the hospital. And he gives it to them with the intention that, they'll heal from it, and he'll tell them the traditional story that it comes from. With me, I can't give one of ones away. I kind of have, and I can't just make a song for everything I can, and I do, but finding just different ways of existing. Like when I was there at Penn, the Dr. Melissa Hunt, who gives IQ exams, and we are doing a study about like how, what helps success in college that's academic, but also non-academic. And so she's giving me this IQ exam, and she kind of got me in it. Like she understood where I was coming from, because I was struggling at Penn. I was failing some of my courses. I was doing all of the other things that was taking up my time and not contributing to my major. So I was like not studying right, not really going about it as prepared as I should have been. And I hesitated in the block challenge where you're making the shapes. And instead of just doing it, I stood there still. And she's like, Talon, I get it. Oh my God, I understand. You just don't want to be in the lab here. Like you want to be out there in the trenches, and you're second guessing yourself because in here, it's all colonized. It's culturally irrelevant to where you're coming from as an indigenous person sometimes, because where you're coming from isn't so concerned with A, B, and C that America props up. So just believe in the work that you want to do, and that it's equally as valuable as somebody doing something that may be deemed as more prestigious, coming up with a new therapy method or something like that. You can do just as much in the field. And I think that's where you'll be happy. So, and it gave me a relief because I stopped thinking about, what's this big change that I can make that really isn't who I am. And instead, what can I do that I genuinely enjoy, and keep doing, and not just give up on, but rather stick with, because there are times where it just feels like everything is against you, even your own. And when there's nowhere to turn to, I mean, for me, the family concept strikes home because going into Penn, I was going because my brother, my little brother, I felt like I was gonna have to like house him and take care of him. So I was like, let me figure out a way to, you know, achieve and make enough for the both of us. And then, you know, 2-3 years ago, he passed away. So then the thought in my head is like, was everything for naught? You know, like was this all, you know, I sacrificed friendships, I sacrificed my community and my relationship with my community by being so far away and all of this stuff. But then I had to shake that off and understand like the spirituality of it and how everything's eternal. It's all worth it. It's all connected to something. And if anything, he's there with me now as I do all of this stuff even more. So sorry, that's very long-winded, but the spirituality part gets me because that's exactly not so much religion, but the spirituality of where I come from and how I implement it into my daily life is how I survive, as well as how I think about, you know, having a community mindset.
Alan, thank you so much for sharing that. It was so thoughtful, and I could see in my mind's eye you folding all of these experiences and lessons together to give yourself meaning about all of these considerations. So it's really important because that's how you've been able to sustain yourself. And it is really wonderful that you're willing to share that with us. So I thank you for that. So I turn to you, Dr. Botsy. You have responses to my rather long question.
Yeah, I think I was reflecting on what you had shared about, you know, what can help to keep us grounded. And it's funny, without having talked about what each of us were going to share, I feel like Talon actually talked a lot about some of the thoughts that I had had. So if you're listening to this and you're like, wait, I think I said something about that, that's true, because you did. I just really felt moved by what you said around the idea of having a soft heart, and that I think sometimes we struggle to like own that, of like, yeah, like we care about other people in a deeper way. And I think Talon, when you were talking about the idea of intention, I think that in and of itself can be so grounding. I know it is for me in really, again, thinking about who I want to be as a person, but as a mental health professional, that part of the goal is making sure that I'm alleviating other people's suffering in whatever way I can. And so in some ways, part of what keeps me grounded is really being focused on that, of if people are not in a good state, again, whether that's with their mental health or anything else, that's always going to be the goal. So as long as they're suffering, then that's the thing that keeps us grounded and not losing sort of a sense of purpose around it. I think there's been a lot of things that have been written and said around for some of us seeing our profession as a calling. And I have very much felt that way about becoming a psychologist, where it just felt like something aligned in a way that I don't think I was so wise to kind of come up with myself. I think it's just this sense of feeling like, yeah, this feels like a good fit, and really feeling like things are able to move forward, again, in my own life as well as the lives of my community, when I don't lose sight of that. And I think there's so many things to what Miss Alita was talking about that can be so discouraging, but some of those things can be so short-sighted as well. So it is almost like, yeah, the idea to what you're saying, Reverend Gibson, of like, how do you keep the sort of long vision of what feels important, what are you moving towards, and not losing sight of that, even if there are moments of feeling discouraged. And I think I would say, you know, a month ago, definitely feeling that way, feeling very disheartened, feeling discouraged, and just trying to really think about how to almost have this idea of like radical hope, and really continuing to move forward and not losing sight of what the goal is. The last thing I'll say, which again, I think Talon actually beautifully talked about, is the importance of just our own self-awareness. Because I think there's a way that we can also feel pressure to be all things to all people at all times. And yet sometimes you do have to think about what your capacity is at this moment. And even if you're not involved in activism or work in a way that you expect yourself to be, there's different ways of being involved. And I think a lot of the conversations that I end up having with my clients or with my students is, what do you have capacity to do right now? And it's okay if you don't have capacity now, it doesn't mean you won't always have it. But it's important to know how to step back when you need to and how to fully lean in. Because again, because it's a marathon, you can't necessarily feel like you want to put all your energy in one moment at one time, because you're still needed the next day and the day after that. So how do you really think about how to stay grounded by being self-aware of what you have capacity for? And a big thing that I also hear from students, so again, I appreciated that Talon talked about having some struggles at Penn academically, is that sometimes we're so reluctant, whether it's students or us, to ask for help and really just say, hey, I need support. And I think that's so important to ask for help early, but ask for it often. And I know it's something I struggle with as well. Sometimes I'm like, I want to figure it out myself first. And sometimes that's important, but in a lot of ways, when you're really thinking about how to take care of yourself, it's important that you don't lose sight that there are a lot of people, a lot of great community at Penn and beyond that are just like here to support you. All you have to do is just say that you need, that support and you need that help. So I will stop there.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Botsy. I'm particularly struck by your saying to a person who's in a moment, what do you have capacity for right now? All that we can do is what we have in the moment. And I think that's such a helpful framing for anyone. What do I have capacity for now? That I can do. The rest is the rest, but this is what I can do for now. Thank you for your response. My friend, Olita, your thoughts.
Oh, you all are so good. And one thought is that it's important to be among people like you. That it's important for us to have a network that is a network of people who are steeped in the same kind of spiritual connection to social justice. So that, they innately, you don't have to have the conversation. You all know how each other is feeling. I also think it's important to have that kind of network to sometimes just start laughing. I mean, levity is like, geez, man, did you think it was going to be this bad? Or, what the hell are we going to do now? But you gotta have perspective. And in getting perspective, for me, I always have to maintain, and this might sound a little odd, but the certain requisite amount of anger so that I can have the fight. Now, to have that, I have to study and I have to pay attention and I have to discern. And I've had role models for that. I'm not a writer. I think I write proposals and all of that. I have not written in the way that I want to write. But I read the writing of Marian Wright Edelman, who is my par excellence of role model. And if you haven't read some of her writing and her prayers, it is absolutely, it builds you up and it lets you understand what this is all about. The other thing that keeps me going is I love children. I don't like to see anybody mistreat children, and especially my children. And when I say that, I mean my children of my race. and I'm steeped in the spirituality again of it all. I remember, we go out to the Alex Haley Farm, to the Children's Defense Fund's annual Hall Proctor Institute, where we gather with people from all over the country who struggle with doing just a little something. What can we do? What can we do in our church? What can we do in our community? But the underlying connectivity is we all want to do something. We all know that things are not right for children, that we could be doing so much more. Well, I'm lucky enough, I guess, to say that I was around when Sam Proctor was still living, when the Proctor Institute got started, and would preach every summer in July out at the Alex Haley Farm. And he said something that has stuck with me forever. It capsulizes what I think. And he said, for those of us who inherited assets that we did not earn or deserve, that we have a responsibility to those of us who inherited deficits that they did not earn or deserve. So that is where I start my day with. That if I can be a buffer, if I can help in the struggle, if I can help a child along, if I can keep somebody from hurting a child, that is my ministry. So if there was a category of ministry that was community organizing and social justice building and whatever, I would call myself a minister of that. So that keeps me going. I could have left this work many times over the course of my career. I could have had much more money. I could have been much more recognized in a field. But my heart and my soul is with my people. So that's what keeps me anchored. That's what keeps me mobilized. And I say to people all the time, I also know that, and this is not being immodest, I know that I have a way of communicating and connecting with people. I know that. And it's a talent, as if God had given me the talent to be able to sing. I always wanted to sing and do music. But I recognize that it's a talent that I have been given. And I use it. You don't get a lot of accolades, but you find people all the time who will come back to you and say, that time when you said this, I get notes from people. I get notes from people I don't even remember sometimes. And I have people that, so it is like that's what drives me. That's what fuels me. And that's what keeps me anchored.
Thank you so much, Alita. Thank you so much. For those who are listening to this rich conversation, the reference to the Children's Defense Fund, Samuel DeWitt Proctor Child Advocacy Ministry, I know it's a mouthful. You can Google it and learn more. It is, as Alita said, an annual gathering. It's a think tank in a way no one would imagine a think tank over that week period that we are there, but we learn so much, we share so much, and then each person leaves with a bit more to do in the communities where they are planted. I am excited for this and disappointed that we've come to the end of our hour. I want to thank all of the panelists for your great contributions to this conversation today. And on behalf of Vice President Charles Howard, the Office of Social Equity and Community. My hope is that this particular panel conversation, and I expect it will, encourage so many people going forward. Again, thanks to my co-moderator, Raneem. Thank you, Olita. Thank you, Dr. Basti. Thank you so much, Talon, and to the magnificent Mercedes. We all give you thanks. Have a good day. Take care, everyone. God bless.
Thank you so much, Will. Hope to see you soon.
Absolutely.